Now, Tadhg Hickey is described here on my screen as an Irish comedian, actor and writer, and he is indeed all of those things. But now he's something more. He is an international face and voice for the moral centre of the world today, the moral centre that stands with the oppressed people of Palestine, and he's just off the boat. Tadhg, welcome home. I'm sure you have been warmly received in your home city, in your home country, but please know that our entire audience was rooting for you, praying for you, and were never as happy as when we saw you bounding through Dublin airport in your singlet, looking a picture of joy as well you might have been, being greeted by your 2 young children and your good wife. So welcome home. I know you do not want, and you are repeatedly saying it, to dwell on what happened to you, because what happened to you pales by comparison with what happens every day to the Palestinians. But you must know that the international audience would value your reflections on what happened that dark night when the gangs of Netanyahu boarded your vessel. Would you talk us through that?
Of course, Akara, and thank you so much for lovely intro and a lovely little feature whilst I was away. It meant a lot to my family, actually, and I thank you for it. Yeah, of course. I mean, I think I was in touch not long before the interception, and the most extraordinary thing about the interception is that Israel, a state on trial for genocide, just told the world about its new war crimes that it was planning. It was going to kidnap all these people, and it was going to bring them here, it was going to bring them there, and it just proceeds as one, just does whatever it wants, and the world just lets it do it. It really is quite bewildering that they're so out and proud about it. They speak about it in their media. They ring up the various embassies, the relevant ones, the Germans, and they tell them their plans. I think maybe potentially the presence of the Spanish and Italian navies might have put them off kind of all out trying to kill us, trying to murder us, as they did to the 10 Turkish activists in 2010. But they just see where the line is and they'll always cross it. So right up until interception, I suppose I'm a bit of a dreamer. I'm kind of thinking we're going to Gaza, and that's why I signed up for the Flotilla. I didn't sign up to be intercepted by Israel. I have no business in Israel. I wasn't planning on going there, and I didn't sign up to go on a jolly, or as Piers Morgan might say, to go on a selfie yacht. I think, like, if I wanted to go on a selfie yacht, I could pick a better route than one that would end up coming face to face with the most psychopathic, unpredictable army probably the world has ever seen. So right up until the end, and some of the boats got as close as 20 nautical miles, and that was my main thing. I was just like, we're so close to keeping a promise to all these people in Gaza to actually reach the beaches. But as you say, it became clear that it wasn't going to happen, and you're faced with this army that's both, sadistic, but also kind of ridiculous. Like, it felt like they didn't really know what to do with all these boats. And, I think there was probably 47, 50 boats in the end. One was thinking if there was 100 boats, they wouldn't have been able to deal with us. And to just skip ahead for a moment, there's 100,000 people who signed up for the next mission. There were 30,000 signed up for my mission. So I think Israel's got a massive, massive problem on its hands. There's just so many people globally now have had enough with the lies and the propaganda. And I really, truly believe that this state is on its last legs. But to go back to the evening, the commandos that actually came in our boat, it's just random who you're going to get. The commandos that came in our boat, it was a relatively light interception. They commandeered the boat. You are held at gunpoint. I was the first person to be isolated. So when they came on board and they told us to keep our hands in the air, and they're actually being quite nice at the start, and I was kind of thinking, just for a moment, I just faltered for a split second and thought maybe some of them are kind of okay, because I'm actually always seeking the humanity in people anyway. That's kind of my default. And then you just look to the side and you realize that one of the other commandos is filming the whole event. So everything is contrived with them. Everything is a propaganda opportunity, and they were filming themselves having a light, interception. Again, they can use that for posterity to say they're the most moral. And I really, truly believe that this state is on its last legs. But to go back to the evening, the commandos that actually came in our boat, it was a relatively light interception. They commandeered the boat. You are held at gunpoint. I was the first person to be isolated. So when they came on board and they told us to keep our hands in the air, and they're actually being quite nice at the start, and I was kind of thinking, just for a moment, I just faltered for a split second and thought maybe some of them are kind of okay, because I'm actually always seeking the humanity in people anyway. That's kind of my default. And then you just look to the side and you realize that one of the other commandos is filming the whole event. So everything is contrived with them. Everything is a propaganda opportunity, and they were filming themselves having a light interception. army in the world, living the most moral democracy in the Middle East. But I was the first to be isolated and at gunpoint. So obviously you think to yourself, I don't know what way this is going to go. I've got young kids at home. I've just got to stick to my training and do what I do and be completely non-violent. It's a non-violent mission. But in that moment, I suppose it's no longer in your hands. You don't know what's going to happen. And I kept thinking to myself, we're dealing with an army that has enjoyed a level of impunity the world has never seen. So what's stopping them saying that even if I am totally non-violent, that I was confrontational with them, I'm out and proud as, you know, somebody who has been quite supportive of the resistance. I've been to Lebanon, blah, 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 blah. You can frame this, no problem. They can murder me in international waters and my family would probably never know the truth because the Western media, including my own, is so cowardly and so bought and paid for that I would back them to go with the Israeli line as they have for the last 2 years rather than the truth. That was the kind of stuff going through my head initially. But the commandos getting onto the boat, that was the easy part. That was by far the most pleasant aspect of the experience of the next 5 days. It got an awful lot worse from there, I can tell you.
Tell us about that. They took you to a notorious prison where good friends of mine have rotted in the past.
Exactly.
What was that like? What was your experience like in the dungeons?
So before we get to the dungeons, we're brought to Ashdod port where we're manhandled off the boat. And then they had this kind of like Guantanamo Bay, kind of almost Nazi Germany-esque kind of a theme park set up where everyone is put out in the hot sun. You cable ties, seated in awkward positions. And if you don't adhere to the awkward position, you have to go up on your knees. About 3 hours in the sun, and then as the sun went down, they move you from spot to spot. I lifted my head up to see what was going on with one of my comrades at one point who was being physically and mentally abused. They always target ethnic minorities as well. It seemed like the darker the color of your skin, the more likely you were to get a hiding from them. I've never in my life, I think Chris Small said this as well, I've never in my life seen a more almost cartoonishly, openly racist group of people in my life. If you were white, you'd get a slightly better time. And if the more Palestinian you are, like the more depravity is going to be visited upon you. So I had my head slapped a few times because I was looking up just to offer a bit of solidarity to people. We were eventually about 6 or 7 hours in that position before we were processed. So yeah, and there's all these kind of like little Hitlers, you know, they're kind of like shit Nazis, you know, like they're like kind of real like fascists, but they're not very good at it. So there's a kind of like the phrase I was thinking for them is kind of silly sadists. On the one hand, they're kind of, you know, really sinister in what they do, and they try and create this kind of spook sensation for you, but they're not very good at it. There's a lot of fear in their eyes as well, and that's a theme of the next few days. This attempt to put guns in your face, and dogs and SWAT teams and psychological, you know, torture techniques. But also there's a real weakness to them as well at the same time. It's this weird duality with them. And I think it was very symbolic of an ideology and a state that's in its last legs, I hope. But yeah, so I get processed. They go through my bag. If they see any Palestinian image, or like I had my Ladji Celtic jersey and they just threw it in the bin. And I kept thinking, if you were so comfortable in yourself, why do you have to dispose of anything that bears the symbols of the country that you've taken over? Like if you're so comfortable in your righteousness to be in this land, why is every Palestinian image such a threat for you? Like it reminded me, I think, of some of the kind of harder elements of loyalism in the north of Ireland. It's so insecure, it has to have its flag everywhere, and it has to try and kind of degrade and traduce anything in the opposing community's culture. It's just like screamed insecurity to me. We eventually get processed. I don't sign anything. They asked me to sign something that gave some recognition that I had entered Israel illegally. I hadn't. I'd been kidnapped in international waters. I refused to sign anything because that would be to acknowledge that I was even trying to get to Israel in itself. I wasn't. I was trying to get to Gaza, which I think most people would concede is in Palestine, a state that Britain, Ireland, Australia, most major Western powers recognise. I refused to eat, and I just went with a dignified non-compliance protest, as is the kind of tradition, I think, of the Irish Republican struggle. And then when I eventually got to Kitziyot prison, I realised that they'd got their wish to send us to a torture prison, as you say, like a notorious prison where many Palestinians have been murdered, tortured to death. And I thought we were going to get special treatment because we were white, though. I really believed like this will be, a performative more than anything else. And as the first day particularly passed, I realized, oh my God, we're not getting water. We're not getting access to a lawyer. We're not getting any contact with the outside world. And there was an Irish comrade of ours in the cell across from me who needed insulin. I don't think he'd mind me saying he's a 75-year-old man. And they would not give him his insulin, to the point where most of my wing were rioting, like slamming on doors, doing everything in our power to try and get them to give him his insulin. And they didn't, because they said they didn't care. And I quote one of the guards specifically, the night that we were rioting to get Paddy his insulin, he said, "We do not have any doctors for animals. You people are animals to us." And it's very hard for people to understand just how far down the rabbit hole the Israelis are as a society, in terms of their just emboldened, brazen, racist worldview, where they're just the supremacists. They kind of rule the world and everyone else can go to pot. I felt particularly embarrassed that the Irish government still has such a diplomatic relationship, and Ireland has a roaring trade with Israel, when they're so openly anti-Irish as well. They hate us. They despise us. They called me Irish as they pulled me off the boat and manhandled me onto the ground. And as I say, they tried to let a 75-year-old Irish activist who spent most of the last 10 years working in summer camps in Bethlehem, they tried to let him die. They didn't, they were happy to let him die. And yet Ireland still has a roaring trade and allows our airports to be used by US war machines to send the weapons to continue the extermination in Palestine. Such a disgrace that the Irish government lets the Irish people down that much. When they already hate us, we might as well sanction them. We might as well break off diplomatic relations, because we're the bane of their lives in terms of Europe. Like, we've totally let them down. They think that we should be on their side, but I'm glad that the Irish people will never en masse side with a racist, apartheid, fascist state like that has to be dismantled.
Now, you say you didn't get water. How then did you all survive?
Well, they would, with absolute contempt, they will just like say, you drink that, like you drink the toilet water. So they refer to a little hovel that each of us have in our cell. Imagine there's like usually about 12 or 13 men to a cell. We haven't washed in weeks. We've just come off a mission that has gone on like much longer than any of us anticipated. None of us are smelling particularly well. A lot of us are struggling mentally, and we're stuck in this kind of cell together. And from the first moment, it was like, the bottled water is for us. That's for the prison guards. Yard time, the sun, is for us. And this is where you go. Like, you go into your little cages. They would sometimes move us from cage to cage, this kind of psychological warfare. They'd put you on a hot, like, absolutely, you're in the middle of a desert, baking sun, and they'd bring you to this sham court where there's a judge and you don't have access to a lawyer, and the judge is asking you to comment on this thing that you've been accused of doing, which is entering Israel illegally. And you just keep saying, well, I haven't entered Israel illegally. I was in international waters and kidnapped about 40 nautical miles from Gaza. Also, I'd like to speak to my lawyer. And they're like, I know your lawyer is on the way. And then the lawyer never comes. It's just this kind of sense of, it's almost cartoonish evil. And I just kept thinking to myself, how are they allowed to treat Western citizens like this? And as well as I do, we can bitch and moan about it and whatnot. And I really hope people do listen to what we have to say. Many of us were beaten. Again, the darker the color of your skin is, the worse it will be for you. No medicine, no doctor, drink toilet water for 3 or 4 days. That's absolutely fine. If you need insulin and you're about to die, no problem. That can happen. But ultimately, George, nothing will probably be done. That's what's kind of heartbreaking about it. I still can't quite get my head around it. I had, unfortunately, had to accept that when it comes to Palestinians, obviously the Western governments particularly don't give a shit. They're happy to back Israel all the way, to kill as many of them as they so wish, in whatever degree of bloodthirst and bloodletting they want to reach. That's totally fine. Who knows how many Palestinians have been murdered in the last 2 years? And who knows how many Palestinians will be left to rot? I think a Palestinian prisoner passed away today, effectively left to die. Yeah. And my partner and I just saw it earlier, and we both started crying again for the 10th time in the last couple of days, because my whole family are completely traumatized. I found it reasonably okay, because it kind of there's a tradition in Ireland of a kind of a stoic standing up to bullies. You don't let them defeat you. We know what we're doing is just. You know, Ben Gavir, absolute cartoon faced, cartoon souled Ben Gavir waltzing into, our cells armed to the teeth, describing us as terrorists. And you're kind of thinking, we were the guys who were trying to bring baby formula to besieged population in Gaza. You're the people who are exterminating babies at a rate that the world has never seen in modern times. And we're the terrorists. It kind of felt in that prison where you're completely abandoned for days on end. You've no contact with the outside world. Then, and only then, in the last 2 years of activism, and maybe in the last 10 or 20 years of reading about Palestine, only then did I really understand what it's like to be a Palestinian for a moment, just a glimmer, that you can be left to rot in the prisons of these openly racist, heartless. I've never seen such sadism in my life in the eyes of these monstrous people who are hideous inside and out. But because I have a passport of privilege, they can low-level torture me and Paddy and the other Irish activists and the other Global Smooth Flotilla gang for a few days, but we'll get home. And I think at this point, most of us are home, but the Palestinians will never get home. And I just kept thinking to myself, at this moment in time, there's about 500 Palestinian children in these monsters' prisons, and all the Western governments just turn the other way. And they know now exactly. I mean, imagine if they do that to us with the privilege that we have, with the platform that I have. I can come out of these prisons and I can talk to you, and people can hear my story. No one will ever hear the stories of the Palestinian children who are being tortured in these, don't think I've ever used the phrase before in my life, in these subhuman people's prison camps. They're just the most, and you know what, coming face to face with some of them, I just thought to myself, there's no reforming this. This as a state, as an ideology, as an entity has to be dismantled. It'd be like trying to reform apartheid South African government. They're just, it was an eye opener. It was like the mask. When you saw behind the mask, it was even more hideous than you would have imagined.
Another Irish tradition when political prisoners are thrown into a cage is solidarity. I'm thinking of the H blocks, which became a university, and the solidarity built in those days continues until now. Although many are now dying off, when you meet the people who were interned in these cages, their fellow feeling is obvious immediately. Have you bonded now forever with the 500, the gallant 500 that sailed on and on into the guns?
Absolutely, man. And it's something with the Israelis that, well, first of all, they're cultureless as well. Like when fascism takes over to the degree that it has taken over in Israel, there's no culture, because culture kind of can't really coexist with the fascist, racist ideology, because true art can't really breathe then in a state like that. It has to be just, art in the service of the state. And it really feels like that. It's a cultureless, witless, oppressive energy. They shout at each other. Like Irish people kind of can be quite loud, Arabs can be quite loud, but this is on another level, like just domestic administrative people in offices, like just kind of screaming and barking at each other. They've kind of brought like humanity to a really low level, I think, and in the midst of all that kind of darkness and barking and whatnot, there was something really beautifully human about not just the Irish, as you say, but all the activists together, to a man and to a woman. I put it this way, I'm telling you about my little traumas now, because it's important that the world knows what they do to Western, a lot of Western activists. It's important for it to be documented, and I will document it myself, and I will do interviews this week. And then I will put it to bed, because we need to get back focused on, they're doing this to Palestinians right now, you know what I mean, who don't have the voice. But the point I'm getting at is, if the Israelis think this is going to break our spirit, or has broken our spirit, to a man and to a woman, we came out of that prison, of our prison cells, and we're eventually making our way home. We all were planning on what the next move is. We're planning on what we do together next, and the bonds, as you say, because when you're on the side of justice, when you face inhumanity, and when you come up close and personal to it, and all they have is violence. So I was kind of half expecting some of them to try and approach us in a way of, you've got the wrong end of the stick, you've heard propaganda from Hamas or whatnot. There was none of that. It was just ugly, bald violence. That's all they have. When we lashed the cell doors to try and get Paddy his insulin, by the way, backed up. Paddy, I don't think, had any other Irish in his cells. He had about 10 or 11 other nationalities. And on the flight home, he was telling me he was so moved by the fact that there was Algerians, Turkish, French, and a lot of young lads, and they led the protest for Paddy. So it wasn't even an Irish thing. It was a solidarity thing as a comrade who was about to be left to die by a fascist regime. And we all basically became ungovernable until he at least saw a doctor. Now, they still didn't give him his insulin, but they at least brought a doctor, because they had told us that they didn't have any doctors for animals, but they must have made an exception because the solidarity was so strong. But in that kind of movement of people that have each other's backs and support each other, it just became so clear that we will prevail. We have to prevail because we're just, we're on the right side of history. We know they're in the wrong. And all they had was violence. For the crime of backing Paddy up that night, they burst into my cell, for instance, SWAT team, a salivating, squelching attack dog, and guns are put in our faces. You can see their little lasers like traveling around your face. And you don't know, because they've enjoyed such impunity, you don't know if they're going to shoot. But that's all they had. That's all they have. You know what I mean? And I really want to leave people with that idea that we looked into the whites of their eyes, particularly the Irish. We weren't shouting at them. We weren't screaming at them. We sang rebel songs at them. We were non-compliant. We didn't take their little showers so that they could take photos of us looking fresh before we left. We didn't eat their horrible food. We just non-compliance with dignity, and we looked them in the eye and we saw that they're scared. And all they had, when all you have is violence and you've no answer other than more violence and more hatred and more racism and more apartheid, you've got nowhere to go. There's no wiggle room. And I think we are the many, they are the few. What we're doing is just, and I think what they're doing is unjust. And I just would urge people, they're at a very, very low point at the moment. The fact that they threatened me personally with 10 to 20 days of incarceration, and I signed nothing. I didn't eat their crap food, and I non-complied across the board, and I was out in 4 days. And I think that's not because they thought I was a nice guy. It's because they're running out of room. They're running out of road. And I think now is not the time to let up. We need to keep pushing. Italy has become ungovernable because of this. Their economy has been brought to a halt. That's where Ireland needs to go. And that's where all of Europe needs to go, because it's really no longer about just Palestine. It's about all our humanity. If we lose Gaza, we lose the world.